You may have asked yourself, why me? Why did you, someone so loving, sincere, and kind, fall into the hands of a narcissist? Why did you have to go through such deep pain, overwhelming confusion, and the crushing feeling of being deceived and abandoned? You may have believed you were the victim, that you were weak, naive, or lacking judgment. But what if none of that is true? Here's what few people will tell you. You were not chosen by accident. You were the karmic consequence that the universe sent into their life. You were the clearest reflection of the harm they had caused others. You were the boundary they couldn't cross. You were the light that exposed the darkness inside them. Your presence didn't just disrupt their world. It served as a catalyst for your own awakening. You didn't come only to end their toxic cycle. You came to begin a new one, a cycle of healing, of coming home to your true self. In this video, we will explore 7 profound and spiritual reasons why you were never their victim. You were their karma. You were the lesson. You were the reckoning they could no longer avoid. And more importantly, you'll come to understand. The pain you went through was not meaningless. It was the beginning of your soul's awakening, and the journey back to who you truly are. Reason 1. You were sent to expose their false self and awaken your true self. There's a truth that many people only realize after leaving a narcissistic relationship. You didn't come into their life to be loved by them. You came so they could no longer pretend to be lovable, not even for one more second. Narcissists live in a world carefully crafted by themselves, a world designed to serve their grandiose yet hollow ego. They construct a false identity, charming, confident, seemingly perfect, skillfully manipulating and controlling every situation to benefit themselves. Every word they speak, every gesture, every move is calculated to uphold an image others will admire, desire, or fear. They wear a mask not just around you, but around everyone, even themselves. And then you entered, quietly, genuinely. You came with real love, sensitivity, empathy, and a simple belief in the goodness of people. You didn't try to tear off their mask, but your authenticity began to crack it, little by little. Because the truth is, falsehood cannot survive long in the presence of something real. Your presence became a mirror to the false self they worked so hard to protect. You were loving a real person, but what they gave you was only a performance. And you could feel the emptiness behind it. You didn't fall for it as long as others did. You started to notice the contradictions, the wrongness, the shadows in their behavior. And even if you didn't call it out, your eyes, your energy, your very existence threatened them. Nothing terrifies a narcissist more than being truly seen. Because if you can see through their mask, you can also see the weakness, fear, pain, and emptiness they've been desperately hiding. You became the mirror that doesn't lie, the one they were never ready to face. But that's only half the story. While your presence shook the stability of their false self, their manipulation, devaluation, and disregard for your worth forced you to confront your own self. You started questioning. Am I really too sensitive? Is it wrong to ask for respect, to be heard? Or am I just not good enough? These painful questions became the very door to your inner journey, the path back to your authentic self. You began to realize that you're not weak, like they said. You learned to stand tall without needing their validation. You began listening to your own inner voice instead of constantly trying to please others. You discovered that sensitivity is not a weakness, it's a gift. And then, in the silence after the breakup, through the tears and the sleepless nights, you began to meet a new version of yourself, stronger, clearer, more grounded. You found your true self, the version that no longer needs to prove or ask for permission to exist. So if you ever thought you were the narcissist's victim, I invite you to look again through a different lens. You didn't come to be destroyed. You came to expose their deception and awaken your truth. You are not weak. You are light, and light never bows to darkness. Reason 2. You were the consequence of their emotional draining, and you learned how to protect your own energy. If you've ever been in a relationship with a narcissist, you probably know the feeling. The more you loved them, the more exhausted you became. The more you tried to understand, to forgive, to stay connected, the more you felt empty, invisible, and hurt. Every time you tried to give, what you received in return wasn't gratitude, it was coldness, dismissal, and even manipulation. And that wasn't a coincidence. Because narcissists don't know how to love. They don't connect to give, and receive, they connect to drain. Like emotional vampires, they approach you to feed the hollow ego within. The care, love, and empathy you offer isn't met with a heart, it's devoured by fear of abandonment, the hunger for control, and deep-rooted insecurity they desperately try to hide. You believed that if you just loved harder, became more patient, gave more of yourself, everything would be okay. But the more you gave, the more you disappeared. That's because they're never capable of being full, they only take. They don't give back. A relationship with them is one-sided, unbalanced, and deeply draining. And yet, that very pain became your greatest lesson in energy and emotional boundaries. At first, you thought you just loved the wrong person. Then you started asking deeper questions. Why am I always the one trying? Why do I feel so tired and lonely even when I'm not alone? Why does this love leave me emptier, not fuller? Those questions marked the beginning of your journey to energetic sovereignty. You began to realize, not everyone deserves your unconditional giving. Loving doesn't have to mean sacrificing yourself. Just because someone needs you doesn't mean they deserve your healing. You began to set boundaries. At first it felt scary, you feared losing love. But soon you realized what you were clinging to wasn't love, it was dependency disguised devotion. You learned to step back and observe. You learned to say no, even when your heart still cared. You learned to hold on to your own energy rather than pouring it into someone else's void. That was the moment you began to transform. From someone easily drained, you became someone who owns their emotional power. From a soul that was vulnerable to being used, you became a soul with awakened spiritual defenses. You began to feel the difference between true connection and conditional attachment. You could sense when someone approached to give and share or simply to take and walk away. That was the gift the narcissist never intended to give you. They thought they were hurting you, controlling you, keeping you locked in their cycle. But unknowingly, they were teaching you how to protect your energy, how to love without losing yourself, and how to walk away in silence when your heart is no longer heard. So no, you weren't just their karma because they couldn't drain you the way they wanted. You were their karma because you became too powerful to be drained. And through pain, you were trained into a version of yourself who knows how to love yourself first, love from fullness, and know exactly when it's time to leave. Reason 3, you unintentionally triggered their deepest insecurities, and they unintentionally revealed your inner strength. Narcissists may appear confident. They often walk into your life exuding charm, success, and control as if they know exactly who they are, and always hold the upper hand. But behind that polished mask lies an immense emptiness filled with old wounds, deep insecurities, and a fear of being seen or abandoned, all covered up by arrogance. Their confidence isn't built from within, it's borrowed from the admiration of others. They don't truly love themselves, they love the ideal image they've created to avoid facing their real pain. And then you came along. You didn't mean to hurt them. You didn't say anything too revealing. You were simply yourself, someone with potential, emotional depth, sincerity, and the capacity to grow from within. But what you didn't know was that your authenticity became their harshest mirror, because you embodied everything they craved but could never truly attain. A heart capable of real love and connection. A sharp intuition that sensed when something felt off, even without proof. A quiet resilience, the more you were hurt, the stronger you became. A willingness to heal and rise from pain, rather than hiding behind a false self. Every honest word you spoke, every boundary you set, every truthful reaction you expressed, all of it touched their deepest fear. That they weren't good enough. Not special enough. Not important enough. They started to feel small next to you, even if, on the surface, they tried harder than ever to seem superior. You became the mirror they never wanted but couldn't avoid. You forced them to see a truth they had spent their entire life trying to escape. And that's why you were their karma. But here's the paradox. While they were working tirelessly to break you down and reclaim control, you were quietly discovering a power within you that had been dormant all along. You once believed you were fragile. But when faced with their manipulation, criticism, and silent punishment, you didn't collapse. You woke up. You once thought you needed them to feel whole. But when their love turned toxic, you began seeking a new source of energy from within. They tried to make you question your worth. But their hurtful words only led you to ask, why am I believing them instead of trusting my own instincts? Why am I shrinking myself to fit inside the box they built for me? From the ruins you began to rebuild. But this time, not from the gaze of others, you built from truth, from lived experience, and from a growing love for yourself. So while they believed they had won, that they had made you smaller, weaker, more dependent, the truth is, they awakened a strength you didn't even know you had. They fear you because you are living proof that you don't need to pretend to be lovable. You don't need to manipulate to be respected. You don't need to dominate anyone to be enough, just as you are. So if you've ever felt small in their presence, remember this. You were never small, you were simply shrinking to protect them. But the truth is, you were born to shine, and it is that very light that makes them tremble. Reason 4, you were the cause of their isolation, and you learned clarity in relationships. Narcissists survive on supply the relationships they manipulate to receive admiration, submission, and control. They are masters of image management, appearing kind, charming, sympathetic, or irresistibly charismatic in front of others. And just as skillfully, they divide those who might otherwise unite and see the truth. They manipulate by gossiping behind people's backs, sowing doubt, spreading rumors, and turning one person against another until they are left at the center, the one everyone looks to for what's right and wrong. But then you arrived. You were not an easy-to-control supply. You didn't fear abandonment enough to blindly believe everything they said. You began asking questions, you reacted. You spoke the truth, even if at first only to yourself. And that made them lose control. The truth is, you didn't just make them feel unsafe, you made others start to wake up. Narcissists can manipulate someone who is emotionally weak, but they cannot control a soul that is starting to awaken, and that's who you were. Your pain, your exhaustion, the loss of innocence in your eyes, all it said something. Those around the narcissist, the ones who once trusted, defended, even admired them, began to feel uneasy. They heard your story. They saw your breakdown. They witnessed your transformation. And when you found the courage to leave, or to speak up, or even just to stop staying silent, a part of their mask fell off. You might not have seen it immediately. Maybe some still defended them. Maybe they quickly rebuilt a new persona, cried, and painted you as the toxic one. But by then, you had already planted a seed of awareness in their environment. And the ones with hearts, with intuition, they sensed something was off. Sooner or later, they would begin to see the truth. You were the spark that ignited the collapse of their social illusion. You were the last straw that made people look at the full picture, no longer through the lens the narcissist controlled. You didn't come to expose them intentionally, but the truth you carried was too clear to ignore. So if you've ever felt isolated, pushed away from community, friends, or even family, know this. They were simply repeating their oldest tactic: divide and conquer. But with you, it stopped working. Because once you were pushed out, you began to learn how to tell real from fake. You learned that some people are only around for convenience, not for love. You realized that not everyone who smiles at you is your friend. You started trusting your intuition more than sweet words. You understood that real love never requires you to betray yourself. And most importantly, you stopped being so easily fooled by appearances. You developed an emotional radar, a kind of inner compass that helps you sense who is truly connecting and who's just playing a role. You could now see through tactics like love bombing, guilt tripping, and silent punishment, and you no longer fell for them. So yes, you were their karma, not just because you stripped them of the social power they worked so hard to build, but because you became the turning point that forced them to face themselves if they were ever brave enough, which most are not. And you, even after being hurt, disconnected, and disillusioned, you now see with clarity. You have a stronger heart, greater emotional intelligence, and the wisdom to choose the right people and the right relationships. And that is something they will never have. Reason 5. You were their karmic reckoning, and they were the doorway to your spiritual awakening. Not all pain is meaningless. Some pain comes to break us, but also to open something far deeper. If you've ever been in a relationship with a narcissist, you know what it means to be destroyed from the inside out. You slowly lose your emotions, your intuition, your self-worth, until it feels like you're disappearing from your own life. But what you may not have realized is this: the entire experience may have been spiritual in nature, a kind of sacred initiation. The narcissist didn't just come into your life to hurt you. They came unconsciously and without any noble intention, but they ended up becoming a tool used by the universe to usher you into a new phase of your soul's journey. Your awakening. It sounds like a paradox. Why would someone so cruel be the one to open a spiritual door for you? But if you look deeper, you'll see. They are the accumulation of distorted energy, of the harm they've caused to many others before you. And you, with your natural sensitivity, your genuine capacity to love, absorbed all of that darkness they carried. You weren't just hurting for yourself, you were feeling the collective pain of everyone they've ever harmed. When they manipulated you, it was a repetition of the damage they had done to others. When you cried, it echoed the tears of those whose spirits they had crushed. When you doubted yourself, you were reflecting the confusion of so many others who had been made to believe they were the problem. And then, when you could take no more, when you hit the very bottom of despair, a door began to open. You started asking bigger questions, not just about the relationship, but about life itself, about human nature, about truth, about faith, about the divine. You started asking, why do I attract people like this? What within me still needs healing? What is the meaning of this experience? What is real love? Who am I beneath all these wounds? And that is when the awakening began. You may not have recognized it at first, especially not in the middle of the pain. But being pushed to the edge where there's nothing left to hold on to was what forced you to turn inward, to meet your own soul, and to begin the journey back to the light. As for the narcissist, they don't understand. They don't care. They are not conscious. But what they don't know is, you were the karmic debt the universe sent them. They could no longer manipulate you like they did others. They couldn't escape your reflection because you wouldn't shrink, stay silent, or look away. You forced them to face something they fear most. They no longer had power. And that loss of control when they couldn't dominate you like they did their other supplies became a shock they couldn't manage. You were the boundary. You were the reflection. You were the alarm bell. And you? After everything, you began your healing journey not by forgetting, but by understanding. You realized, real love never destroys. Some people come into your life not to stay but to awaken you. What you went through wasn't punishment, it was initiation, a sacred rite of passage. And that is why you are no longer the victim. You are the awakened one. And the awakened always carry light for themselves and for others. As for them, they remain trapped in the darkness you finally walked away from. Reason 6, you forced them to face the truth, and you learned how to see through people. One of the most frightening skills narcissists possess is their ability to create a perfect image. They know exactly what to say to make you feel seen. They know how to act in order to be loved, trusted, and admired. That's why they can stay in relationships for years without anyone suspecting a thing. They wear a mask of kindness, competence, and charm, and most people never see past it. Until you came along. You weren't like the others. You had a strong intuition, a delicate sensitivity, the kind that can't be easily lulled by appearances or empty promises. You started to feel that something isn't right, even when you couldn't explain why. You weren't easily swayed by shallow apologies. You grew suspicious when they used silence to manipulate you, or blamed you for being too sensitive. Your perceptiveness made them feel unsafe. They began to tighten their control. They created more complex situations to confuse you. They twisted narratives more subtly just to keep you spinning in their web. But the more they tried, the more they exposed something. Inconsistencies, repeated patterns, gaps in their character. And so you began to see clearly. You noticed the signs you once ignored. Contradictory words. Irrational anger when you didn't comply. The way they distorted truth to protect their image. Tactics like silent treatment, reverse blame, playing the victim, and guilt tripping. You saw through them, not through rose-colored glasses anymore, not through the hope that they will change. You looked straight into their darkness, and for the first time you didn't look away. And that terrified them. Narcissists aren't afraid of criticism, they're used to it. In fact, they know how to turn it into evidence that you're unstable. But what they truly fear is being quietly, calmly seen for who they really are. Because once you see the truth, they can no longer control you. You no longer submit. You are no longer a source of supply. And that makes you the biggest threat of all, the one they can't control. But through this process, you also discovered a hidden gift buried in the pain. You learned how to see through people. You're no longer easily swayed by someone who seems kind. You no longer judge based on words, but by the alignment between actions, energy, and real emotion. You began to discern. What's real love, and what's love used for control? What's genuine care, and what's disguised interrogation? What's true support, and what's help designed to make you feel indebted? You no longer need someone to teach you how to spot red flags. Your soul learned that through lived experience. You developed an inner alert system, subtle yet clear. A radar for dishonest people, artificial energy, manipulative patterns. And you know how to walk away quietly, without bitterness, simply because you now know what you deserve. You no longer choose people based on emotional highs. You choose based on the depth of presence. You no longer crave someone who overwhelms you with intensity. You want someone who makes you feel safe in their silence. That's the gift of your pain. You no longer need anyone to protect you because you've learned how to protect yourself. And the narcissist? They lost the control they once thought was permanent. They realized they lost someone who truly saw them and still chose to love. Someone who, if they had cherished, could have been their one chance to break free from the shadow they're trapped in. But they didn't. And you, with all the pain you endured, walked away. Stronger, wiser, and no longer fooled by any mask. Reason 7, you are the end of their karmic cycle and the beginning of your own spiritual awakening. At some point in your pain, you may have asked yourself, why me? Why did I have to endure all the lies, manipulation, emotional, mental, even physical abuse from the narcissist? Why did I have to pay the price for the damage they caused to others before me? And the answer, if you're brave enough to hear it from your soul, might be this: because you were strong enough to end it. The narcissist has gone through many relationships. They've hurt many people, maybe for years, maybe for decades. And most of those people, lacking understanding, lacking strength, or having been manipulated into self-doubt, walked away silently, carrying wounds that never healed. But then came you. You didn't just walk away, you looked straight at the truth. You didn't just suffer, you learned from your pain. You didn't just survive, you awakened. You were the stop. The place where the karmic cycle could no longer repeat unconsciously. You didn't pay for others. You transmuted all that distorted, outdated energy with your own light. With pure love, with extraordinary courage, with your deep emotional resilience. You ended a cycle of pain that no one before you could. And in doing so, you stepped into something new. A journey back to your soul. A journey no longer centered on being loved by someone else, but on learning to love yourself the right way, deeply and truthfully. A journey no longer about trying to change others, but about changing your own frequency so you no longer attract brokenness, masters love. The narcissist, though never intending it, became the gatekeeper to a level of depth you had never accessed before. They forced you to re-examine everything. What is love, really? What have I believed that was never true? What is real? Who am I when no one else is controlling me? And so, along the way, you stopped being the victim. You became the observer, the learner, the healer, the awakened soul. You moved from breakdown to awakening, from darkness to light, from dependence to sovereignty, from emotional confusion to sacred emotional clarity. And the narcissist? They may go on seeking new supply. They may defend themselves, spin stories, even slander you to protect their fragile ego. But deep down they know. You were the one they couldn't fully control. You were the one who truly saw them and still stayed, for a time, out of love. You were the final one in a long line of victims, but the first to become their karma. You didn't come to hurt them. You came to end the pain. You didn't come to teach them a lesson, but your presence was the lesson. And when you walked away, you didn't just leave them. You walked away from your old self, from false beliefs, from unhealed wounds you no longer wish to carry. You walked away reborn. From the wreckage, you rebuilt. From the darkness, you found yourself. From the pain, you became light. And if you're still reading this, know this. You are not lost. You are not weak. You are the one the universe chose to end the cycle of suffering and begin a new one. A cycle of freedom, awakening, and true love.